Sarah, a young woman just starting her career, found herself in a weird situation after a late shift at the office. As she fumbled with her keys, a cold shiver ran down her spine. The hair on the back of her neck stood on end, a primal instinct whispering that she wasn't alone. She glanced over her shoulder, her heart pounding in her chest. A lone figure stood at the edge of the lot, shrouded in the shadows. He was just watching. Sarah tried to shake off the feeling, telling herself it was just her nerves getting the best of her. But deep down, a seed of unease had been planted. She quickly unlocked her car, the sharp click of the lock echoing in the silence. As she slid into the driver's seat, she could feel her pulse quicken. She locked the doors, the sound a small comfort in the growing darkness of the night. Sarah started her car, the engine roaring to life like a beacon in the night. As she pulled out of her parking spot, her headlights briefly illuminated the stranger. He was gone. Relief washed over her, but it was short-lived. As she approached the parking lot exit, she noticed a figure walking quickly along the sidewalk, almost as if trying to keep pace with her car. Her breath caught in her throat. It was him. The same shadowy figure from before, now seemingly determined to stay in her sights. Sarah's mind raced, fear pumping through her veins like ice. She considered stopping, calling for help, but something told her that staying in her car, in the relative safety of the moving vehicle, was her best bet. She pressed down on the gas pedal, her car picking up speed. But to her horror, the figure kept pace. His stride unnaturally long and fast. He was getting closer. Adrenaline surged through Sarah's body as she gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles turning white. The deserted streets seemed to stretch on forever, each passing moment an agonizing eternity. She glanced nervously in her rearview mirror, her heart pounding in her chest. The figure was still there, his features obscured by the darkness, but his intent clear. He was pursuing her. Desperate, she made a series of sharp turns, hoping to lose him in the labyrinthine streets. But he matched her every move, his presence a terrifying constant in her rearview mirror. Just when she thought the chase would never end, she spotted a beacon of hope. A brightly lit gas station bustling with people. She pulled into the station, her arrival a stark contrast to the deserted streets she had just escaped. Relief washed over her in waves as she finally felt safe. As she looked back towards the street, the figure was gone. Sarah had escaped the stranger's pursuit, but the chilling memory of that night, the fear of the unknown pursuer, would forever haunt her. Imagine the life of a social worker. Long hours, challenging cases, and the constant pressure of helping those in need. It's a demanding job, but for Emily, it was a calling, a way to make a real difference in the world. One chilly autumn evening, Emily found herself driving down a quiet, tree-lined street on the outskirts of town. She was on her way to a routine home visit, a familiar part of her job. The house, a modest, two-story structure, seemed ordinary enough, almost picturesque in the fading light. As she parked her car and walked towards the front door, a sense of unease settled over her. Maybe it was the way the wind rustled through the fallen leaves, creating a whispering sound that seemed to echo her own anxieties. Or perhaps it was the unsettling stillness of the house, a stark contrast to the bustling neighborhood she had just left behind. Whatever the reason, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. She took a deep breath and rang the doorbell, the sound unnaturally loud in the stillness. She waited, but there was no answer. Emily knocked again, this time a bit louder, but still, there was no response. She glanced at her watch, a knot of concern forming in her stomach. Her client, a single mother named Mrs. Peterson, had never missed an appointment before. As she turned to leave, she noticed something strange. The front door was slightly ajar. A chill ran down her spine as a wave of unease washed over her. She knew she should probably just leave and contact the authorities, but a nagging sense of responsibility compelled her to investigate further. Cautiously, Emily pushed the door open and stepped inside. The house was dark and eerily silent. A musty odor hung in the air, a mix of dust and something vaguely metallic that made her stomach churn. She called out, her voice echoing through the empty house. "Mrs. Peterson? It's Emily, your social worker. Are you home?" Her words were met with an unsettling silence that seemed to amplify the growing sense of dread in her heart. Picture a two-lane highway cutting through endless fields of corn, the sun dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. That was the scene for Sarah, driving home after visiting family. The drive was long, and the silence was starting to get to her. That's when she saw him, a lone figure standing by the side of the road, thumb outstretched. Now, Sarah knew the rules. Never pick up hitchhikers, especially not when you're alone. But something about the man's tired eyes and gentle demeanor tugged at her heartstrings. Maybe it was the isolation of the road, or perhaps the fading light playing tricks on her, but she decided to break her rule. As the man got into the car, a wave of relief washed over his face. He introduced himself as Thomas, explaining he was trying to get to the next town over. His voice was soft, almost a whisper, and he kept his gaze fixed on the passing scenery. At first, the conversation flowed easily. They talked about the weather, the beautiful sunset, the mundane things strangers talk about to fill the silence. But as the miles ticked by, Sarah noticed a shift in Thomas's demeanor. His eyes, once filled with gratitude, now held a distant, almost haunted look. He fell silent, his gaze drifting off to the darkened fields beyond the road. Every now and then he would mumble something under his breath, words that sent shivers down Sarah's spine. They were barely audible, but they sounded like prayers or maybe pleas, uttered with a desperation that chilled her to the bone. Sarah tried to ignore it, focusing on the road, but the hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. What was this hitchhiker's secret? Why did his presence unsettle her so? The sun had vanished completely now, leaving them shrouded in darkness, the only light coming from the car's headlights. The silence became heavy, punctuated only by the hum of the engine, and Thomas's increasingly disturbing whispers. Sarah tried to make conversation, to break the tension, but her attempts were met with mumbled responses. Thomas's gaze remained fixed out the window, his eyes reflecting the passing headlights like a deer caught in the open. It was as if he was looking for something, or perhaps someone, hidden in the darkness. Then Thomas turned to Sarah, a strange glint in his eye, and began to speak. His voice, though still soft, was urgent, his words tumbling out in a torrent. He spoke of a darkness that followed him, a presence he couldn't escape. He spoke of terrible deeds, things he'd done, things he was running from. The things he said were beyond unsettling. They were the ramblings of a tormented soul, confessions that made Sarah's blood run cold. He spoke of a place he called the Valley of Shadows, a place where darkness consumed all light, where the air itself whispered secrets of forgotten sins. He claimed he had been there, seen things no living person should ever see. His words were fragmented, disjointed, but the terror in his voice was undeniable. It was clear to Sarah that this was no ordinary man, and she had stumbled into something sinister, something that filled her with a primal fear she had never known. Sarah's mind raced. Was this man delusional, dangerous, or both? She gripped the steering wheel tighter, her knuckles turning white, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. She had to get away from him, find a safe place to stop. But as she glanced at the seemingly endless road ahead, she realized they were in the middle of nowhere. The next town was still miles away. She was trapped. Suddenly, Thomas grabbed her arm, his grip surprisingly strong, his eyes burning into hers, with an intensity that made her gasp. "They're coming," he hissed, his voice raspy with terror. "They're always coming." He pointed a trembling finger towards the rearview mirror. Sarah, her heart in her throat, dared to look. In the distance, barely visible in the glow of the taillights, were two figures, walking with an unnatural gait, their silhouettes dark and menacing against the night sky. Imagine moving into a new neighborhood, excited to start fresh. That's what Emily had in mind when she bought the charming Victorian house on Elm Street. It was perfect, with a wraparound porch and a garden that seemed to bloom with an impossible array of flowers. Her neighbors for the most part were friendly and welcoming. But there was one, an older gentleman named Mr. Smith, who lived across the street, who seemed shrouded in an air of mystery. Mr. Smith kept to himself, rarely seen outside, his windows always dark. But whenever Emily caught a glimpse of him, he would offer a warm smile and a polite nod. Some of the other neighbors whispered about his past, about a tragedy that had struck his family years ago. They spoke in hushed tones, their faces etched with a mixture of pity and fear. Emily tried to ignore the gossip, reminding herself that everyone has a story, and it was not her place to pry. One afternoon, while tending to her garden, Emily noticed Mr. Smith watching her from his porch. He was sitting in a rocking chair, a blanket draped over his lap, his gaze fixed on her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. She quickly looked away, her heart beating a little faster. When she glanced back, he was gone. Emily couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, that behind Mr. Smith's friendly facade, there was something more, something unsettling that sent chills down her spine. As days turned into weeks, Emily couldn't shake off the feeling of unease. She would find strange things in her yard, a child's toy, a torn piece of lace, a faded photograph of a young family, their faces scratched out. Each object seemed out of place, remnants of a life lived and lost, and they filled her with a growing sense of dread. She tried to rationalize, telling herself they were just things left behind by previous tenants. But deep down, a part of her couldn't shake the feeling that they were connected to Mr. Smith, to the whispers of tragedy that surrounded him. One evening, while searching online for information about her new home, Emily stumbled upon an old news article. The headline sent a shiver down her spine. "Family vanishes from Elm Street home, no sign of forced entry." The article detailed the disappearance of a family who had lived in her very house decades earlier. The father, a man named Robert Smith, was the prime suspect, but no arrests were ever made. The case remained unsolved. Emily's blood ran cold. Could this be the tragedy the neighbors had whispered about? Was Mr. Smith, the seemingly harmless old man across the street, connected to the disappearance of an entire family? The thought was too terrifying to contemplate, yet she couldn't ignore the mounting evidence. The strange gifts in her garden, the intense stares, the chilling news article. They all pointed to a dark secret lurking beneath the surface of her seemingly idyllic neighborhood. Driven by a mix of fear and morbid curiosity, Emily began to dig deeper. She started piecing together fragments of information from old newspaper clippings, local lore, and hushed conversations with the neighborhood's oldest residents. A disturbing picture began to emerge. Robert Smith, it turned out, had been a recluse, obsessed with his family, convinced that the outside world posed a threat to their safety. He had become increasingly paranoid, isolating his wife and children from everyone, keeping them virtual prisoners in their own home. Then, one day, they were gone. Vanished without a trace. The authorities suspected foul play, but with no bodies and no evidence, the case went cold. Some whispered that Robert, unable to bear the thought of losing his family, had taken matters into his own hands, eliminating the threat he perceived in the only way he knew how. Others believed that the family had simply run away, seeking a fresh start far from their troubled patriarch. But the truth, as Emily would soon discover, was far more sinister and far more tragic than anyone could have imagined. Have you ever had that feeling? That feeling of being watched, of eyes boring into your back, even when you're alone? That unsettling prickle on the back of your neck that sends shivers down your spine? This is the story of Sarah, a young woman who experienced that feeling, and for good reason. It started subtly, a fleeting glimpse of a rusty, nondescript van in her rearview mirror, always a block or two behind. At first, Sarah dismissed it as a coincidence, her mind playing tricks on her. But as the days turned into weeks, the van remained a constant presence, a shadow lurking in the periphery of her life. The unease gnawed at Sarah's insides. Every time she glanced in her mirror, the van was there, maintaining a steady, unwavering distance. It felt like a predator stalking its prey, patiently waiting for the opportune moment to strike. The fear, once a flicker, began to consume her, casting a long, dark shadow over her once ordinary life. Sarah found herself constantly looking over her shoulder, her heart pounding in her chest like a drumbeat of dread. Sleep offered no escape, haunted by nightmares of the van, its rusty exterior glinting menacingly under the pale moonlight. One evening, as Sarah drove home from work, the feeling of dread intensified. The traffic was light, the streets eerily quiet. And then she saw it. The van. It had turned onto the same street, its headlights cutting through the gathering gloom like the malevolent eyes of a predator. Panic surged through Sarah's veins, a cold fist clenching around her heart. This was no longer a coincidence. She was being followed. Desperate to escape the suffocating terror, Sarah pressed down on the gas pedal, her car lurching forward. Her heart pounded against her ribs, each beat echoing the growing terror that threatened to overwhelm her. But the van kept pace, its presence as relentless as ever. It was a terrifying game of cat and mouse, played out on the desolate streets. The van, a menacing shadow, mirrored her every turn, every desperate attempt to shake off the chilling pursuit. Thinking fast, Sarah veered off her usual route, her mind racing, searching for a way out of this nightmare. She swerved onto a side street, hoping to lose the van in the labyrinth of narrow lanes. But her pursuer was relentless, its presence growing ever more menacing. Each turn, each desperate maneuver, only seemed to fuel the terrifying chase. Just when the terror threatened to consume her completely, Sarah spotted a glimmer of hope. A police station, its neon sign a beacon in the encroaching darkness. With a surge of adrenaline, she swung the car towards it, her tires screeching in protest. The van, momentarily caught off guard, hesitated for a moment. That crucial second that made all the difference. Sarah pulled into the brightly lit parking lot of the police station, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The van, its headlights flashing briefly in the distance, sped past, disappearing into the night. Moving to a new city can be a lonely experience, especially when you're starting fresh. That's exactly how Emily felt when she relocated to Chicago for a promising job opportunity. Eager to settle in and make new connections, she decided to find a roommate to share an apartment with. After weeks of searching, she stumbled upon the perfect listing, a spacious, sunlit apartment with a seemingly friendly woman named Anna. From the very first meeting, Anna exuded an air of quiet charm. Her demeanor was pleasant, her smile disarming. She spoke little about her past, attributing it to a desire for a fresh start, a sentiment Emily could relate to. Relieved to have found a seemingly compatible roommate, Emily brushed aside the nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right. She convinced herself it was just the stress of the move, the unfamiliarity of her new surroundings playing tricks on her mind. As the weeks passed, Emily couldn't shake off the growing sense of unease that had settled over her. Anna, despite her initial friendly facade, was proving to be an enigma. Her behavior was erratic, her moods shifting like quicksand. She would spend hours on end locked in her room, emerging with a distant, almost vacant look in her eyes. It was as if a switch had been flipped, transforming the once charming woman into a stranger. Emily tried to rationalize Anna's behavior, attributing it to stress, or perhaps a difficult past. But deep down, a seed of doubt had been sown, and it was beginning to take root. One evening, while Anna was out, Emily stumbled upon a box tucked away in the back of their shared closet. Curiosity got the better of her, and she cautiously lifted the lid. Inside, she found a collection of disturbing items, newspaper clippings detailing unsolved murders, strange talismans, and handwritten notes filled with cryptic symbols. A chill ran down Emily's spine as she realized the gravity of her discovery. These were not the belongings of a harmless eccentric. They were the tools of someone far more sinister. Fear coiled in the pit of Emily's stomach, a cold dread seeping into her bones. She had to get out, to escape the suffocating confines of the apartment before it was too late. As she frantically stuffed her belongings into a bag, she heard the unmistakable click of the front door opening. Anna was back. Emily froze, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. Slowly, she turned to face the door, her breath catching in her throat. Standing in the doorway was Anna, her eyes cold and calculating, a cruel smile playing on her lips. In her hand, she held a gleaming silver knife, its blade reflecting the dim light from the hallway. "Going somewhere, Emily?" Anna asked, her voice a chilling whisper that sent shivers down Emily's spine. "We haven't finished our little game yet." Two stories, two encounters with the unknown, two lives forever changed. Both Sarah and Emily survived their ordeals, but the scars of that night remain etched deep within their memories. These chilling encounters serve as a stark reminder that evil can lurk in the most unexpected places, hiding beneath a veneer of normalcy. But here's a question that chills me to the bone. Were these isolated incidents? Or could there be a connection, a sinister thread linking these terrifying events? Some might dismiss it as mere coincidence, but I believe the truth is far more unsettling. The answers, my friends, lie hidden in the shadows, waiting to be revealed. If you dare to venture further into the darkness, I invite you to join me next time as we delve deeper into the chilling world of true crime and uncover the terrifying truth behind these encounters. But be warned, once you step into the shadows, there's no turning back. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to my channel, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next chilling chapter of our journey into the heart of darkness. Until next time, stay safe and keep the lights on.